No openness. This is like the theme ultimately in the United States. There's no openness about it. So, is there less prostitution in the United States? Hi, and welcome to ULMX, the Universal Language Media Exchange. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do so. I'll give you a second. Today we're talking about sex. ULMX is a language learning app. We make videos on YouTube for German for beginners, English for advanced students like Germans who have already learned English a lot in school and want to improve their speech, and we make videos about society and culture just because we find it interesting. In this video we're talking about sex, but not just, the topical sort of topics, if you will, so to say. Not just the topical stuff, not just the surface. We want to talk about the underlying values and what we can deduce from these superficial observations. And to dive right into it with an example about what I mean by that, we could talk about food. The tradition of having a cold dinner. That's a bit foreign for Americans. It's a difference that actually you could read into. So what this cold dinner would look like could be just bread, cheese, and cold cuts. And why would you do that? That's the interesting question. Not, oh, it's different. If you find all the little topical things different, all the little topical differences interesting, I think you'll find the underlying causes, the values, the worldview that leads to that difference a lot more interesting. And with sex, I wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page at the beginning, that we're not just talking about these little differences because it's funny or whatever. It's interesting to think about the mentality that kind of fosters these differences. So maybe the ultimate conclusion could be, and ultimately the conclusion's open to interpretation. Anyone can come up with their own conclusion. In fact, we're interested to hear what you guys think about these differences in the comments down below. It's a long video, so you'll have plenty of time to type, won't you? So the conclusion, for example, could be with the food. Well, Germans see it like this. If you have a warm lunch, you don't need to have a hot dinner. And it saves time. Maybe you could argue that you're going to get into bed earlier and you'll feel better the next day because you save time. Or maybe you could get more done because instead of cooking and cleaning so much, you just cut a loaf of bread, eat some cold cuts, and then you can keep doing other stuff. Maybe you can get something done at home, or maybe you then have time to go to football practice or soccer practice or get something else done. It saves time. It makes sense. And there are benefits to that way too. Okay, anyway. So now we've already been in, video's already 10 minutes long. But let's talk about sex. Oh, that's a song, isn't it? But there are 4 major headings here that I want to use to guide this discussion. Censorship and nudity, which I think probably only Americans relate with sex in the first place, but we're going from the American perspective here, so if you're a German watching this, we consider censorship and nudity sexual. Then we're going to talk about the religious aspect, sort of the slightly historical view. We're going to talk about prostitution as a heading. That's the third of our 4 headings. And education is the 4th heading. So let's dive right into the censorship. And censorship has a side note to it, but nudity. Nudity is something that would always be censored in television. I think the rules are different depending on what station it is. So if it's a station that anyone can get, there's no nudity there. And then there's some stations where most people have them, but you still can't put nudity on them because most people have them, unless it's after like 11 o'clock or something. And even then, it's really just like butt cheeks. Whereas in Germany, you can see anything, any time of day, on any channel, which is really surprising. It doesn't include some things, but those things will be played on those same channels late at night. In America, this is unthinkable. Unthinkable. I think there are different rules depending on satellite, cable, and like the channels. The channels have to follow the rules. So I guess if you have some insane package where you get like 1 million channels, I guess it's possible. But yeah, that's censorship. And that censorship doesn't just pertain to nudity. This censorship is really, really pervasive. On the radio, there's no swearing. No swearing and no explicit content, which means drugs, sex, and crime, generally. Depends. Depends on the way you say it, but a crime itself, like, if you're actually just saying it very bluntly, if you put it out there explicitly, if it's explicit, it gets beeped out, or you don't beep out a song on the radio, but if you were doing a, say, a news sort of thing, that would get beeped out. In a song, you always have to have a clean version for the radio. Clean version for the radio. Which is insane for me here in Germany when I listen to the radio, and of course they're playing a lot of American music, or whatever, English. Doesn't matter if it's British. We understand each other pretty well. Everything is in the song. It's the original. It's not the clean version, which is sometimes good, sometimes really surprising, and kind of awkward depending on who you're in the car with. But the censorship is non-existent in television in Germany for swears as well as nudity. And like I said at the beginning of this video, what's most interesting is, what does this actually say about the society, about the culture, about the worldview here? You know, it's funny because the United States is all about freedom of speech. Now, freedom of speech is more like freedom of opinion and being able to express that opinion publicly without being persecuted. But you're not really allowed to say quite anything. So the freedom of speech there is a bit contradictory. It's not as complete as you might expect. And in Germany, it leads one to think either the swears aren't taken as seriously, because the German swears aren't beeped out either. The German swears are in the German TV shows. American swears, of course, on the radio you could say, well, yeah, why are you going to bother beeping that out? Most of the people probably aren't even understanding the song text as it's going so quickly in the music and stuff. So, good argument, fair enough. But even the German swears are all pretty much allowed. And sometimes it's surprising the context you see it in, like a very professional news show, and maybe they interview someone on the street and that person swears. That would never make it to TV in America. It's just like, oh, come on, dude. Like, if you're the guy doing the interview holding the microphone, you're like, you just ruined that whole take. We can't use that. And be like, oh, sorry. Or if you listen to a radio show on YouTube, you'll hear them swear, and then they'll be like, oh, could I say that? And they're like, no, it's fine. We have someone beeping it out, because there's always a delay, and they always have time to edit it. They have like 7-second delays on all broadcasts. Ever since that Janet Jackson thing at the Super Bowl. Once again, we're back to the nudity, but that was like devastating because it was live. It wasn't, no one could do anything about it. And ever since then, if you don't know what I'm talking about, at the Super Bowl, at halftime they do this huge performance, and Janet Jackson was singing with Justin Timberlake, and they were doing some weird dance, and like he was supposed to rip off like half of her costume and like change her costume or whatever, and it just ripped off her shirt kind of halfway or something, and then she was like at the Super Bowl, not to mention being broadcast by like every TV in the entire United States, and nudity, no nudity. It was a scandal, but yeah. Anyway, it was a bit of a side thing. But like I said at the beginning, the United States or Americans believe that nudity and sexuality are really like two sides of the same coin. And I think what we can deduce from this European perspective is that sexuality and nudity aren't necessarily always tied together. For example, at a sauna, now you may not enjoy it, you may not agree, but there is way more European nudity at like a spa or a sauna than you may be ready for if you're coming from the United States or Canada. Yeah, they invented this like nudist colony idea, I think, here. Well, actually, maybe the colony part they invented in the United States because they needed to compartmentalize it. But the nudity itself, this idea, is called FKK, Freikörperkultur, which means free body culture. And like nude beaches and stuff, I do think that was in like Germany, basically, created. I haven't been to France, but it's well known in the United States that it's like totally normal for French beaches to be kind of nude friendly. I don't know. We think that's weird. Well, not all of us, I guess, probably, but it does seem kind of weird. I don't know. I'm not trying to say like you shouldn't free the nipple. I know there's a movement there. I'm active enough on YouTube. I've been around the internet long enough. I know there's a movement saying, why should the women's nipples be censored, but the men's nipples not? And if I were to guess how that's going to play out in the United States, before they free the women's nipples, I'm not trying to hate on your movement or anything, but I think they will probably imprison the men's nipples before they free the women's nipples. That would be my guess. That's my interpretation on the United States culture and how they see that. But we have other topics to get to, so I'll let you chew on that, what I've already said about the censorship and nudity topics, and we'll move on to the religious background. And I think as we go on, they'll kind of mix back and forth, but jump into the religious thing now. So, just generally, the United States is a bit more Catholic, and the European countries are generally more Protestant. Of course, country to country, that's different. If you were to kind of characterize some of the countries in Europe, I would say Spain is a bit more Catholic. Italy is definitely more Catholic. Germany is much more Protestant. But of course, even within the countries, there are different areas which are more or less Protestant Catholic. Great Britain, you could say, like, Great Britain is pretty Protestant, and then like Ireland has more of a Catholic side to it, but it's all a mixture anyway. The United States is generally a little bit more Catholic. For me, I didn't even really understand the difference between Catholic and Christian because I always thought Catholic was Christian. To me, it was a synonym. I didn't even know there was another side of Christianity, like another big side. Of course, there are tons of little different churches, and they're not that little really in the United States, like the Baptists and, the Mormons. There are a lot. But this Catholic side is a bit more conservative. They're really all about waiting until marriage before you have sex. All about waiting until marriage before you have sex. The Protestants aren't really that uptight about it. And I think this is a big influence in this cultural view that you need to keep sex like totally out of sight and out of mind. Although these people, these repressive sort of popes and whatnot, are known for their sexual indiscretions. So maybe in Europe, the way they kind of try not to push it down too much. You can see the world population's rising. It's not easy to push down, I don't think. The repressed. That's a bit of a tangent. But Yeah, the Protestant view is more like, what is the Protestant view? I guess it's just like once you're married, then only sex with that person. I mean, of course, that rule applies in Catholicism as well, but I don't think like that European families really believe that they're going to convince their children to never have sex before marriage, and they don't even try to do that. That's how it seems to me. Good. Now, prostitution. Prostitution. Some say it's the world's oldest profession. In the United States, to the best of my knowledge, is 1,000% completely overall illegal. There are places where it's not well enforced, unofficially tolerated, and I think, similar to the rules about marijuana, where in the United States, the national, federal, at the national level, it is illegal. But similar to marijuana use, the individual states can just make up their own rules. And it doesn't override the federal rules, but in the United States, basically, the federal government isn't supposed to interfere in the state's business. Like, the state is supposed to be the more powerful entity. That's why it's called the United States. But, yeah, sometimes they do interfere. Sometimes they feel like they need to get involved, like they enforce their own laws, even though it's maybe a little bit different than the state's laws. But the way Colorado and Washington, maybe California, I'm not sure, Canada, it's not a state in the United States, but these acts where they've legalized cannabis, I think in Las Vegas or in Nevada, they've legalized prostitution. But like I said, at the federal level, it's not allowed. So, similar to, and I'll talk about Amsterdam for a second here. Amsterdam has a different situation with marijuana. If you've ever heard that you can get cannabis at a coffee shop in Amsterdam, that's still illegal. It's just fully unenforced. And have you ever heard about the red light district where there are prostitutes in Amsterdam in windows with like lights and, red lights? That's also illegal and not enforced. But in Germany, it is legal. And I had never ever heard of this. From my perspective in the United States, I had heard about Amsterdam. Yeah, it's kind of lawless there, but there are laws, they're just not being enforced. And I thought that was the extent of it. I thought that was the worst. Well, this is my American bias. I thought that was the worst it gets. And I was surprised to learn that in Germany, it's legal. You can do it. You have to pay taxes. And so I don't know if I'm for it or against it, but for me, it's really quite shocking. But it was totally disillusioning because I learned that Germany isn't that unique in this regard. When I looked it up, there are varying grades of prostitution legality in Europe, Russia, on the European continent. And if you look that up, you might be surprised. Germany is not the only one in this category where it's fully legalized and fully regulated. There are other grades to this. I don't know it by heart, and glad I don't. Where there's less regulation and I know for one example, in Sweden, what they've made illegal is for the man, assuming, so it was a big assumption here, but kind of a safe assumption, kind of a safe big assumption, generalization. The man, or the customer, is not allowed to buy it. In Sweden, you're not allowed to buy prostitution, but there's no penalty and no illegality for selling prostitution, which is an interesting thing because essentially what they're saying with that, we can deduce anyway, that the person who's selling it is not a criminal because there's something wrong with them in their lives. And it's, well, if any prostitutes are watching this and they're commenting saying, there's nothing wrong with my life, it's a perfectly good career, I earn more than you loser surveyor, fine, fair enough. But I think what they're seeing is like a victim. They're seeing that the prostitute is more of a victim already, so there's no need to prosecute them. Whereas the one who's causing this problem is the customer. But the question is, what's the moral? Where does your moral compass sort of point you in? What's the direction your moral compass points in? Is selling sex illegal? Is buying sex illegal? Is selling and buying sex immoral? I mean, I know you probably do earn more than me. I still wouldn't want to do it though. It's like, wow. Ugh, brutal. All right. But that leads us to our last point, education. What exactly do you guys learn in Europe about sex? Like, who teaches you? And who teaches the Americans? Oh, my voice is cracking. This video is sponsored by water. One of the top liquids in all of the molecular kingdom. So, in America, there's this thing called sex ed. Sexual education. And it's kind of like a fake class that you take in maybe 5th grade or so. And that was it. You get like a little pamphlet, like I have my notes. This is about as much information as you get on sex. Like this. 6 pages, half pages, and that's all you get. Your parents might give you this talk. They call it the talk about the birds and the bees. I don't know why it's called that. They explain to you nothing. Or at least, yeah, I don't know about everybody, but I know from like my inner circle, my experience, there's no like openness about it. No openness. This is like the theme ultimately in the United States. There's no openness about it. So, is there less prostitution in the United States? Probably not. But it's illegal and it's underground. Is there less sex in the United States? No, but it's censored on TV and people pretend like it never happens. Kind of. And it's not open. And that education is not open. It's like, I would say, how did it go down? 5th grade, I got a little pamphlet. I swear it was an afternoon. It was an afternoon. Or maybe it was like 2 afternoons in 1 week. And that was it. That was it. Like, of course you could, I don't know. You might experience, I don't know, how else are you going to come across it? Yeah. If you're studying biology and stuff, sure, I don't know. Yeah, once you get like further into biology, I guess it automatically comes up. But yeah. I feel like they mostly probably just educate. They also separated the boys and the girls for sex education, which is somewhat unfair if you think about it, because we're all in this together, guys. But I would say the girls might have gotten more education because, like, you know, they have more interesting stuff going on at that age. 5th grade is like when you're 12, 13. So that's right when you're supposed to be around the time to hit puberty. Although I think people hit puberty in the United States even earlier now because all the crazy drugs that they give the cows and the milk. When you drink milk or eat cheese, then you get all these crazy hormones and you just hit puberty even earlier. People are hitting puberty at like 6. It's not even funny, but it's like kind of true too. But Anyway, in Germany, in contrast to that, what you see with education, well, I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it. Like, there are magazines and stuff, and I'm talking much bigger than this. Is not a magazine. This is an A3 here. No, this is A5, right? A3 is the big one. A5 is the tiny one. You got like magazines that are just kind of like things that you would be interested in like that kind of time age span of around puberty, 13 or whatever. And they have sex in there. And you learn about it like slowly over time. You know, you might be reading one story about, I don't know, sandboarding, and then another story about like sex or something. And you see some pictures, you kind of get an idea of what's going on there, what that all is. I mean, until you actually hit puberty, you really, really don't give a crap about it anyway. And there's no reason for these magazines to be like hidden. They're like next to the toilet, like Reader's Digest. You can find it at your grandparents' house or something. It's like normalish. It's not like a big thing. It's not like there are posters on the wall or anything. But it's not intentionally pushed down, hidden, and like... Is it repressed? I used the word earlier. What was it? We were talking about the priests? Whatever. It's not pushed down into the dark corners of your basement and whatever the fortress in your mind. It's actually just a part of life. It's not all there is to life. It's not non-existent. And it's not necessarily the same as nudity. Yep. What does that say? What does that say about the European way of life, way of seeing the world, or the German perception of reality? I just find it practical because it's not like sex is evil. So why does sex need to be so taboo? Like fully inappropriate. I mean, it's not always appropriate, but the idea that it needs to be hidden, I think it's quite outdated. And if it were ever relevant, that time is gone. Yeah, I think in Europe, it's more a part of life. In America, it's more like the dark side of the psyche. It's like kind of funny actually, but one more thing I could mention is like I think what the Europeans see, the way they see America is they pretend to be so prudent, and they're not. And like, yeah, these repressed feelings just come out in them being totally like over the top sometimes. Like, why don't they just relax and live their lives instead of trying to put on a show, have like one side of themselves as a big front, and then have this other side of themselves that's like not at all what they're portraying in public. And they should just, I think the Europeans think the Americans should just relax a little bit and stop pretending to be so like well behaved, whatever, when really they're just normal people, like all people. Yeah. I hope you guys found that interesting. It's not like we can come to some grand conclusion. The European way scores a 95 on some objective scale. The American way, a 45. There is no scale for that. There's no quantitative values we can really apply to this. It's just a talk, and I think that, yeah, it's not quite talked about enough in the United States. Oh, I have one more example for you. One more before we go. The United States, I don't think many Europeans actually, I don't know if they know this, if they, like, really know this, but it's really, really common in the United States to circumcise boys. It's not just a Jewish thing. It's not just a Jewish thing. And the reason for this, if you actually look it up in medical, like, literature, where this all came from, why they started doing this in the United States, it's to reduce masturbation. But the parents don't even know that. The parents think, oh, this is a cleanliness thing. This is a cleanliness thing. That's not where it comes from. And the fact that it's so common and the parents don't even know what it's actually for. Like, just think about that. That's crazy, right? It's really common. Look up the percentages. Go onto Google and find out what percentage. It's insane. And now, I'm not here to share my political views, but that's fucked up stuff. That is fucked up stuff. But anyway, let's move on. Let's get on to the outro. This is ULMX, Society and Culture. Oh, look, I got into this. I was half an hour into the video before I started laughing. Good, that's great. If you're watching this, I don't think we have a very large young audience. You probably laughed even sooner than I did. Good. ULMX is, right now it's only for iOS, but we do have plans to expand. Right now we're building out the back end, but you can download it. It's got, if you want to learn English better, if you want to be able to speak more rapidly, without hesitation, this is the app to download and practice with, because the utility of this app does not exist in any other tools. You actually speak. You speak a lot. And the app's only going to get better. Download it now, and when we update it, you're still going to get all the updates. But I can't promise that the price is going to stay so low for very long, because it's so useful. We lowered the price a lot to get users. We want people to try it out. So far, no complaints, although no one's reviewed it yet on the App Store. From what I understand, it's really hard to get reviews. But ULMX is a language learning app. We make language videos for German for beginners, advanced English, and society and culture videos on YouTube. We hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a lot of fun, kind of. Well, yeah, it was a fun video, right? I mean, it wasn't purely positive, but compare and contrast rarely is. But very interesting. The stuff you think about when you switch continents, it's just like, wow. Never thought I would have thought about that. Until next time, this is Matthew Blunt for ULMX, Universal Language Media Exchange. Adios. Ade. Adele. Adieu. Tschüss. Tschüssle. Ciao.